Thank you, Shangan. It's really wonderful to be back at IFPRI. I bring you greetings from your colleagues and your friends in the other Washington. And we're always happy to work with IFPRI. We see IFPRI as a very valued partner for the work we do. Really happy that we have a chance to talk about our strategy. I was actually going to do two things today. One is to give you an overview of our overall strategy. But then I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about the policy work itself, because that's something that I manage within the foundation, and also it's something that we see very close partnership with IFPRI, and so we'd like to get as much feedback from you on that as we go forward. Let's see. How does this work now? Oh, no wonder. Okay, I was doing good. Let me start from the beginning very quickly. Some of you have heard me and others talk about this in the past, about how the Gates Foundation got into agriculture. As some of you know, the Gates Foundation has now been in existence since the year 2000. And it all started when Bill and Melinda Gates read a paper. It was a paper about rotavirus. Rotavirus is a virus that leads to diarrhea. It's something that many of us living in the US and in developed world wouldn't worry so much about. You're vaccinated against it. There's quick medication to take if you get infected, etc. But hundreds of thousands of children in developing countries die every year when they get infected with rotavirus. And so when Bill and Melinda read about this, they thought, isn't it such a shame that simple solutions are not accessible to these populations in the developing world, and should we do something about that? And that was the genesis for much of the work that started in the Foundation on Global Health, and that led to an overall interest with both Bill and Melinda Gates to start this foundation and move forward. For a large part of the initial years, the foundation was very much focused on health issues. But by about 2006, 2007 time period, it was quite clear that one needed to address the broader issues around development, the broader issues around chronic hunger, chronic poverty, and how to change that if you wanted to make progress even on the goals around health. And so that then led to bringing in a global development program within the foundation itself. And as the global development program started, one then said, what should we be doing in the area of global development? And it became very clear very quickly that agriculture has to be the central core of any global development activities of the foundation. Why agriculture? Well, I don't need to tell all of you that. You know why. It's because that's where most of the poor are. In the rural areas, the poor depend on agriculture. Agriculture is an engine of overall economic growth and poverty reduction. And so as we thought through that, we decided we needed to focus on agriculture. But even though most of us in the policy community know about the importance of agriculture, we've been talking about the importance of agriculture, we've been writing about it, we've had 2 lost decades in agriculture development. 2 decades from 1985 to about 2005, when agriculture pretty much dropped off everybody's agenda. And while overall ODA has risen, ODA for agriculture dropped dramatically in this time period. So when the foundation started to work on agriculture in 2006, 2007, we were actually going against the tide. And many people were saying, why are you working in agriculture? Fortunately for us, that tide turned around by the end of 2007. By 2008, the food price crisis hit, and suddenly everybody was talking about agriculture. But we feel proud that we chose to get into agriculture before the food price crisis took place. We feel proud that we came to agriculture with the deep conviction that unless you solve the problem of low productive agriculture system, you're not going to be able to create sustainable change in hunger and poverty reduction. And so today the foundations become quite a major player in the field of agriculture. And if you look at the total ODA going to sub-Saharan Africa, we are now within the top 2, top 3 set of donors giving funding to overall agriculture work in sub-Saharan Africa. One can look at similar tables on overall aid for R&D activities, the CGIAR, etc. And suddenly the foundation has moved quite high up in all of these areas, and we continue to be very much engaged in looking at continuing our presence and the amount of input we make in these fields. Within agriculture itself, up until 2010, the foundation had committed about $1.7 billion. And of that amount, more than half has gone into R&D activities. It's gone into work of the CGIAR and of the other major research organizations around the world, addressing crop improvement, livestock improvement, but also addressing areas of genomics and high-end science itself. We've also been spending roughly a similar amount of money that's going into how do you get technologies that are already developed, that are in the pipeline, and move them down to farmers' fields. How do you work on input delivery systems, output systems, market systems, institutional changes, etc. And then starting in about 2007, 2008 time period, the foundation started an agriculture policy team, and I was fortunate to be appointed to come in and help build that team. And over the last several years, we've put in about $150 million into policy work, data work, etc. And that's very unusual for a private foundation to be investing such levels of support for better data, better analysis, better advocacy, for better policy decisions. And that's something we've been quite proud of. So this is where we've been up to the year 2010. And by 2010, we felt it was time to step back and think about what we've been doing and figure out what we should do as we look ahead. And many of you may say, but you've been working in this field only for 4 years, how come you're starting to think about it? Well, we felt it was good to think about issues in the beginning rather than think about them much later down the road. And there were many reasons why we felt it was important to do that. One, when we started to work on agriculture, we said we wanted to work on smallholder agriculture, and we wanted to work on smallholder agriculture in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. But that was pretty much our overall strategy. We didn't differentiate it further. And we felt it was necessary for us to much more carefully target the populations that we wanted to work towards benefiting. We needed to figure out much better how do you do public good investments and translate that public good investments for impact on the ground. And we wanted to really figure out that whole value chain going from the molecule to the mouth, and figure out what are the interventions necessary along that value chain, and where does a private foundation come into that. But we also felt it was important to recalibrate our work because now there's a lot more interest in agriculture. There are a lot more players that are coming into agriculture. They're putting in a lot more money into agriculture, at least hopefully putting in a lot more money into agriculture. And we felt under this scenario, it would be useful for us to say who else is doing what and how do we fit in into that overall scheme. We also felt that countries themselves are beginning to have much sharper visions of what they wanted to see in their agriculture sectors. And we wanted to make sure that our work complements the visions of the countries and supports their efforts. So, as we look forward, we've continued to emphasize that our goal is smallholder productivity growth. But we felt there was one key word missing in the past, and the key word was sustainable. And so we now view ourselves as looking at ways in which you can sustainably improve productivity growth. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that. I'll be talking about the way in which we brought in a much more explicit look at the environmental and the social and the economic trade-offs that exist as you pursue overall intensification and productivity improvement of smallholder agriculture. Now, as we were thinking through and figuring out targeting of our populations, we spent a lot of time trying to identify where the poor are and what the poor are doing. And here we got enormous help from IFPRI, from the work of Harvest Choice, Stan Wood, and that entire team here. We've been really delighted with the amount of support we've received to do this analysis. And based on this analysis, we were able to say, here is the areas across sub-Saharan Africa where the highest density of poverty exists. And we've then been able to say, these are the farming systems that these populations depend on, and here are potential interventions that one would try to look at in terms of improving their overall productivity, reducing poverty, etc. And as we did this analysis, we identified a set of farming systems that we wanted to work on, and a set of crops that we thought we needed to emphasize, and I'll be mentioning that in a minute. But as we were trying to identify crop-related interventions, we went through a fairly detailed analysis of the current productivity gaps that exist within our target environments in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia. And we broke up these environments by population densities, extent of poverty, and also by their agroclimatic conditions, and then identified overall productivity gaps for the major staple crops and also for the major livestock populations in that region. And once we identified those productivity gaps, we then said, what do we need to reduce those productivity gaps? And quite often, when we start this analysis, one would say, here are the various technology interventions that can reduce the productivity gap. And we took that for sure. But we also learned quite a lot from studies done by a lot of people, including Schengen Fan, of the importance of looking not just at technology, but looking at the infrastructures needed, the institutional reforms that are needed, the policy changes that are needed, etc., in order to reduce the productivity gaps. And having looked at those, we then identified the broad set of interventions that need to take place as we looked across our target populations in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So, as we look ahead, what's our strategy? We've taken a two-pronged approach to our strategy. I think the first prong is basically a revalidation and a reconfirmation that the work we do on global public goods continues to be very, very important. The spillover benefits from investments in global R&D are enormous, and we know that from all the work that exists. And we felt that's an area we should continue to be doing a lot of work in. But we felt that that was just one part of what we should be doing. The second part of what we should be doing is figuring out ways in which you can bring that global public good investments to having impact on farmers' fields. And here, we decided it was not good enough for us to say we are working in sub-Saharan Africa and we are working in South Asia. We said we are going to be much more explicit about the geographies in which we work. So we picked countries within sub-Saharan Africa that we felt we would focus on as we look ahead. So we said in Africa we will be focusing on Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Ghana. These were the countries we said we would do significant levels of on-the-ground investment in order to translate the movement from the lab to farmers' fields. This doesn't mean that we don't care about other countries, but it certainly means that these are the areas where we would see significant investments from our sides and look at spillover benefits moving into other countries. In the case of South Asia, we felt we wanted to be much more specific about where we work in India. So we decided we would focus our efforts in India on just two states, Bihar and Orissa. And then in addition to Bihar and Orissa, we would have a standalone program in Bangladesh. So that's pretty much how we decided to focus our geographic work as we look ahead. Now, mind you, this is in addition to the global public good work that we continue to do. And then, based on the analysis that IFPRI helped us do, we identified a broad set of priority products that we would focus on as we look ahead. Priority products both from a crop point of view and a livestock point of view for sub-Saharan Africa as well as for South Asia. Here's a very busy thing, and I don't want you to look at the whole issue. But basically, what we, as a private foundation, have a theory of change, which builds on lots of other theories of change. But we believe that in order to be able to achieve sustainable productivity growth, we need to make investments in better tools, improved access, and a better incentive structure for farmers to invest in productivity growth. And with that, you would see sustainable productivity growth taking place, which then leads to decreased food prices, increased income, overall growth. And that's the overall chain that we felt we needed to lay out explicitly and show how our work fits into that. Then we went the next step to that, which is trying to operationalize this through the way we do our business. And so the way we do our business is we're organized into three groups. We're organized into an R&D group, an agriculture policy group, and an access and markets group. And so these three groups essentially run three portfolios of grants, which are interlinked. And the interlinking is new relative to where we were in the past. And the interlinking comes from being focused on particular target geographies and being focused on particular target crops and livestock products, and using a value chain approach to try and focus our grant making and our investments. So what this has meant is we now have taken a much stronger bottom-up approach, going from our target geographies up in terms of saying what are the constraints to the value chain for cassava in Ghana, for example, and then figuring out how do you address those constraints, and then making a grant-making program that allows you to do that. So it's a much more proactive, bottoms-up approach to grant-making for having impact on the ground than we've had in the past. And that's a significant change for us, and we'll see over the next few years how we would implement this and how we move forward on that. Now, that's overall strategy for agriculture. Let me take a few minutes and talk a little bit about the agriculture policy work itself. About 3 years ago, I came here and gave a similar seminar. And at that time, we were just starting the policy program. And I came here to say, here is some initial thinking about the policy program. So I'm here today to report back on what we did in 3 years and to give you some idea on where we are going as we look ahead. So we started off with this idea of a policy wheel. We said 3 years ago that you need better data, you need better analysis, you need better capacity for analysis, you need better advocacy in order to create, identify, select better policies, and then you need to be able to move forward an implementation agenda and an M&E process. That's the policy wheel that informed our grant making. And then we then accordingly spent quite a lot of our time making grants along this policy wheel. So over the years, we've invested quite significantly in better data and better data systems, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Invested quite significantly in platforms for policy analysis, as well as investing in policy analysis itself, in strengthening capacity, and then in tracking some of the changes that take place. There's a whole set of grants around this. Given the time limits here, I can't go through each one of them, but this slide shows you the overall scope of the grant making we've done. Let me pick a few examples from around the policy wheel to talk through. One grant that we've been really proud to be part of is the work of the Living Standards Measurement Studies, surveys that go on through the World Bank. For once, we are able to finally say we are putting in place a system that will allow us to give long-term panel data for about 25,000 households across sub-Saharan Africa that are multidimensional, that cover everything about the household from their health, their education, their overall welfare status, and their agriculture production systems. And this data set is now being put together through the work, the grants that we've made to the World Bank. Tanzania has just finished 2 rounds, and that's coming. The first round is already on the web. Uganda has finished 2 rounds of this survey. That's coming up. Ethiopia, Nigeria, Niger, Mali, and several other countries are coming up. So if you haven't seen it yet, go onto the LSMS website and look at the enormous potential of this data that's coming out. This is going to be transformative, and we're very proud of the work that's coming through that. Second, the work of Harvest Choice. The work that IFPRI has been doing in Harvest Choice, trying to marry geospatial data in a way that you can use for analysis and for interpretation, in a way that you can then feed in to the global projections models that Mark Rosgrant and others work on. That's very impressive. And we know as a foundation how important the work of Harvest Choice was for our own priority setting activities. And I think Harvest Choice will be transformative for priority setting activities in all of the public sector enterprises around the world and for the private sector. This is something we've been really happy to work with. We are now in the second phase of Harvest Choice. I didn't update this slide. But we've now given a second 6-year grant to continue this work of Harvest Choice. Millions Fed is an example of the advocacy work that we've done. Raju and the group at IFPRI did such a great job of pulling together success stories of agriculture development and why it was important to invest in agriculture. The great thing about the Millions Fed story was it came out at exactly the right time when everybody was waking up to the realities of investment in agriculture, and we could wave this book and say, look, here are the success stories and this is why you should do it. And Millions Fed is also an important way in which we can say this is why you need an IFPRI, to show this kind of success stories, to be able to put them out on the table for the global community to see. And that's been really exciting. We're now investing quite significantly in areas that we were not in the past. We had a pilot study recently in Tanzania with Conservation International to look at trade-offs and synergies with ecosystem services and environmental impacts that happen with intensification of agriculture. We've gone through a pilot phase, and now we are looking at a major scale-up effort that will allow us to put in place metrics for monitoring environmental consequences of agricultural intensification across many of the target zones that we're looking at in sub-Saharan Africa. Capacity building is an area that we take very seriously in the foundation, although we don't label it as such and we don't talk about it as much. I think the work that's been done on award is something that all of us in the foundation are really proud of. It's a way in which women scientists across sub-Saharan Africa have been empowered to be able to not only improve their own skills, but to be able to empower other women through mentorship programs, etc. And through the award program, we've been able to help 360 women scientists get degrees at bachelor's, master's, and PhD level, but also put them through major mentoring programs. And that's something that's continuing. It's an area that we continue to be committed to. Sometimes people ask me, what's the grant that you're most proud of? And to me, the grant that I'm most proud of is the Collaborative Master's Program in Agricultural Economics and Policy. It's a program that's helping African universities come together and design a common agricultural economics and policy program, and one where they're all working together, a capstone semester at the University of Pretoria where all the students come together, spend a semester together, learn together, network together, and become lifelong colleagues together. And that's a program that's going to result in 280 new master's degrees in agricultural economics and policy over the next 4 years. Now, what makes me proud of this program is not that we're involved in it. What makes me proud of this program was an African program that started by African universities deciding they wanted to do this. And then they got help from people like Rajul to come, bring together and facilitate a process that made it possible. And when we arrived with our grant, they had already been running this program for 2 years with a bootstrap budget. And so we were proud to be able to help support an effort that was very much an African-led effort that was going on. So those are examples of some things we've done. Now, as we look ahead for the policy work, we've decided that as we look into our own grant making over the next several years, we're thinking of our policy work in having 3 sub-initiatives. We'll continue to do significant amounts of work around the data and diagnostics work. That's an area we feel is a very important global public good, and there are very few people who are investing in this area. And we feel we are uniquely positioned to help in this field, and we'll continue to be working in this area. But we're also going to be taking a much harder look at country policy work, especially for our target countries, and to say what's the enabling policy environment that needs to be in place in order to make productivity growth happen? What are the policy changes that need to take place, and how do we invest along with other partners to make it happen? And the third area of grant making that we're looking at is in trade-offs and synergies. And here we want to be very critical about consequences and to be able to look at negative consequences and try to minimize those and look at positive consequences and maximize those. And here we are looking at ways in which we can invest in better metrics for measuring environmental consequences, and we're looking at better ways in which we can strengthen our work on gender, on the role of women in the development process, and look at the connection between agriculture and nutrition. We find that even after 40 years of agriculture development work, there is an enormous disconnect between productivity growth and nutrition improvements. And this is an area where significant work needs to be done, especially in my country, especially in India. So I've got a whole set of slides here giving you what we've done in the past and some of the areas we're thinking about as we move forward, but I'm also conscious of time. So let me just give you quick snapshots. In the area of data, I think there are lots of gaps. Livestock data is a huge gap. Roots and tubers data is a huge gap. Post-harvest data is a huge gap. But also there's a huge opportunity in the use of ICTs, in the use of cell phones, in data collection. And these are some of the things that we are interested in as we look ahead. In the area of country policy, we still have a lot of work we need to do to identify what some of the big issues that we need to work on are. But I think we need to be really looking at what regional economic associations are doing, the regional economic community is doing, and how we can benefit from that work, their work, and how we can strengthen their activities as we look ahead. In the area of trade-offs and synergies, I think there's a lot we need to do. We need to figure out a way in which we can scale up metrics for measuring environmental consequences of intensification and put those in place and build the capacity within Africa and within Asia to be able to do this work. We need to be able to identify policy levers that allow you to minimize environmental trade-offs. We are very much committed to the work of the CGIAR on gender, but we see that the gender work on the CGIAR doesn't transcend enough across all of the activities of the CGIAR, across all the CRPs. And we'd like to see mechanisms by which that'll happen as we look ahead. So these are some of the ideas that we have as we look ahead in terms of our own program. What I wanted to give you was a flavor of some of the thinking that goes on within the foundation about the work that we've done, about the work that we're thinking about in the future. Obviously, there's a lot more detail that I could give you as time goes by. But let me emphasize one point. When everything is said and done, we are essentially a grant-making body. Our job is to identify the best opportunities, identify areas where impact is needed, and find ways in which to help make that happen. But we can only make that happen through partnerships with everybody around this room, everywhere else that's actually working in the area of agriculture development. And we've been fortunate in the last 6 years to have enormously great partners that we've been able to work with. We've worked with the UN system, the CGIAR system, the universities. We've had a particularly strong partnership with AGRA, the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. It's been a really close partnership to see impact on the ground. And with IFPRI, we've had a great partnership with IFPRI. I wanted to show you the extent of our partnership with IFPRI. And this slide is outdated already, but it shows you the extent of grant making we've made to IFPRI. And it cuts across most of the programs that are taking place in IFPRI. And we're very proud of the partnership we've got with IFPRI. But we think the demand for policy analysis and policy research and policy advocacy is enormous. It's enormous, and the supply is very limited. We need 100 more IFPRIs if we have to succeed. And we need IFPRIs at the national level, at the regional level, and even at the international level. So this is an area where I think we need to really look at how do we enhance the capacity and supply as we look forward. And that's something that I'm really excited to continue talking about. But how do we enhance overall supply of high quality policy analysis and high quality policy advocacy that's targeted to enhancing sustainable agriculture productivity growth for smallholders in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Let me stop here, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.